Okay guys, so now we have to-dos table in our database, and remember we also created along a todo.php, and this is our model for our table. Okay, so this todo.php is gonna be in charge of interacting with the to-dos table. So our models in our application are always gonna be stored in our app directory. So remember, by default, Laravel comes with a create users table, and by default it also comes with a user.php, because user.php is going to interact with the users table. So now let's go ahead to our controller, and looks like we created this controller for displaying pages. Now that we want to actually display to-dos, let's go ahead and create a new controller for our to-dos. So I'll head over to my terminal and I'll run php artisan make controller, and I'll give the name of my controller. So I'll say to-dos controller right there. So the controller has been created for me, and right there it is. So now I have my controller for my to-dos. Okay, so everything that controls to-dos, I'm gonna put them right in this class. Now we're gonna be seeing how to create, read, update, and delete to-dos. But before we do that, look at how empty our database is. Okay, so we need some data, some dummy data to work with before we're able to progress, and Laravel makes this very easy by providing us with what we call model factories. So a model factory is simply what we're going to use to generate dummy data into our database. So the name is as it is, model factory. So it's a factory. So if you head over to your database directory, right there you see we have a factories directory, and right there we have model factory.php. And in our model factory, we're going to define factories. So by default, Laravel comes with a factory that is already defined. So factory define app user class. So this is a factory for generating dummy users, and the callback right here receives an instance of faker generator. And I'll show you what faker generator is in case you don't know. So faker generator, and faker generator right here is a package that generates fake data for you. Okay, so right here we discover that we can use faker generator to fake a whole lot of things. For example, we can fake random numbers, we can also fake lorem ipsum text, we can fake people, we can fake addresses, just to have dummy data to work with in our database. So right here, this is the default faker that comes for Laravel. Okay, so when we run this factory, I'll show you how to do it. It's gonna create a dummy user, so faker name, and it's gonna create a dummy email. It's also gonna create a dummy password, and it's also gonna create a dummy remember token for the user. Okay, so how are we gonna define for our to-dos table? So right here I'll just say faker, and I'll define. So I'm calling a define method, and right here I'm gonna pass in the model that we're trying to generate for. So in this case, our to-dos table. So we're gonna pass in the model that is in charge of taking care of that table, which is our app to-do class right here. Okay, so here's our class. So our app to-do class is in charge of that. So the next thing is that we pass in a callback with an instance of faker generator. Okay, and we'll save that to faker. Okay, so just exactly what we have right here. Okay, so right here we just need to return the format in which we want to create that. Okay, so in our create to-dos table, we have an increment which is going to automatically be taken care of by the database. We have a string and we have a boolean. Okay, so right here return an array, and this is how we are going to define our fake data. So first of all, we have a to-do field, so it's gonna match to the key, and right here we need to pass in the fake data that we want. So if I head over to faker, right here we discover that we can fake a lot of things, and I'm just gonna look at how to fake some lorem ipsum text. So I have a sentence method, and this sentence method takes a parameter called the number of words, and a variable number of words equals true, so different characters. Okay, but it's not important. But on my faker instance, now I know I have a sentence method, and this is gonna define a fake sentence, and we're gonna pass in the number of words that we need in that sentence. So I'll just go ahead and say 10 words. I've defined it. Remember, in our table we already defined by default that the boolean, the completed field, should be 0, so we don't even need to take care of that in our model factory. Okay, so now we've defined the fake data that we need to be installed in our to-dos table using our app/to-do class. Okay, so right here, the fields that it's taking in to do, which matches the field in our database right here, and it maps onto the faker data that we want to pass in. Okay, so we are using faker right here so that we'll have different instances when we run this factory. Okay, I'll go ahead and show you this in a moment. Next thing that I need to show you, seeders. We are going to use seeders to actually run our fake libraries. Okay, and consider a seeder as planting data into our database. So we have a to-dos table and we need to insert some data there by default, or we need to insert some dummy data or have it, or whatever type of data we want to insert. So we are going to use a seeder. Okay, so in our terminal, if I run php artisan, you discover that one of those is a make seeder command. So create a new seeder class, and remember, there's nothing complicated about this. It's just a class that is going to send in some data into our database so that we have something to work with. Okay, so another case in which you can use a seeder is in case you're running your application and when you migrate to production, you need a by default user to be an administrator. So you go ahead and just create a new user in your seeder class, and when you migrate to production, you just run this seeder, which is going to automatically create that user for you in your database. So let's create a new seeder for our to-dos table. So we'll say php artisan make seeder, and we'll call this seeder to-dos table seeder right here. Okay, so the seeder has been created successfully for us. So if you look at in your database directory and under seeds, you see we have a to-dos table seeder. So this to-dos table seeder is run the database seeds. That's all that this method is gonna do. Okay, so we define right here what we want to do when this seeder is called. So right here, I'm just gonna call a factory method, which is a default method that comes with Laravel. And this factory method is going to take in the model that we're trying to create fake data for. And the next thing is going to take is the amount of fake data that we want to generate. Okay, so in this case, I just need 7 new to-dos. And the next thing we do is call a create method. So it's going to save that in our database. So when we run this seeder, that's all it's going to do. The factory is going to take in this app/to-do. And remember, it would pick up this app/to-do and it would check in our model factory. Does it have a factory for that? Yes, it does. So it's going to use that factory. That's what this factory method does. It's going to use that factory to generate 7 new to-dos into our database, and this create method is simply going to persist that to our database. But now, how do we run this to-dos table seeder? We need to register that to-dos table seeder in our database seeder. Okay, so we need to call that. So we'll say this call, and we'll just say to-dos table seeder class. So right there we have it. We're calling the to-dos table seeder class in our database seeder. Okay, so run the database seeds. It has a run method, and right here we just call the seeds that we want to run. Okay, so that's our to-dos table seeder. So right here we're supposed to actually define the class as such. Okay, so we have a class called the app to do class right there. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you how to run this seeder. Okay, so if we run php artisan again, we discover that one of the commands we have is a database seed. So we say seed the database with records, so with our dummy data. So let's run php artisan database seed. Okay, undefined variable faker. Oh, sorry about that, guys. In our model factory right here, we are supposed to be defining that on a factory variable. Okay, so you probably might have seen that it's supposed to be factory and not faker. So if I go ahead and run that php artisan database seed, it seeded the to-dos table seeder to our database. Now let's go ahead and see what happened in our database. If I refresh this, I browse, I discover I have 7 new records in my database. So those are the sentences that I just sent right there. Okay, so completed automatically set to 0, the created and an updated time at timestamps are set, and I have 7 new records. Now let's review how this works again, so you have a deeper understanding. First of all, Laravel provides us with a very simple way of sending dummy data to our database. Okay, and this is by factories. We define our factories in our model factory.php in our database directory. Okay, so right here in our model factory.php, by default, we have a factory defined for our user class, okay, which is what we're going to follow to define any factories for our tables. So we need some fake data into our to-do table. So we use our app/to-do class, which is going to interact with our to-dos table. So we get an instance of faker, and right here we return the type of fake data we want. So in the to-do column, right here, we define that we need a fake sentence, okay, and we need only 10 words. If you look at this, all of them have a maximum of 10 words, okay, so not more than 10 words. So that's our factory. It's defined. Next thing we need to know about are seeders. And what is a seeder? It's simply going to create some records into our database so we have something to work with. So we created a new seeder, which is going to create seeds for our to-dos table. And look at the formatting right here. So to-dos table seeder, Laravel automatically knows that for the to-dos table, we're going to use the to-dos table seeder. Okay, so right here we call our factory method, which goes into our model factory directory, picks up the factory for that class right here, and it creates 7 new records into our database. Okay, and how do we run this seeder? We just run php artisan database seed, and it's gonna persist that to our database. And right here, when we run it, you discover we have 7 new records in our database. So in the next video, we're gonna be seeing how to interact with this data using Eloquent, which is our model in the MVC structure.